Hi, everybody. So I'm back today to continue reading our miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. So last time we left off, we met Bull, our hobo, and he was carrying our Edward on his back. Edward, as you know, is still thinking he's Edward and he's speaking like he's Edward. But people in his life that have come across him and picked him up, you notice they name him, they rename him throughout whatever adventure he's on. And now he's back to being a boy rabbit. With Susanna, he was a girl rabbit. So now he's back to being Malone. Okay, a boy. So let's read on. Hope you have your novel study out and ready to sequence with us today. So when we last left off, like I say, he was picked up and Lucy the dog was barking and happy, and they were just wandering and being lost together. Well, let's see what happens next. They traveled on foot. They traveled in empty rail cars. They were always on the move. But in truth, said Bull, we are going nowhere. That, my friend, is the irony of our constant movement. Edward rode in Bull's bedroll, slung over Bull's shoulder, with only his head and ears sticking out. So what's a bedroll? It's kind of like a sleeping bag, but in those days it was just a little blanket that they would unroll to sleep on and then roll back up because it was light to carry. So that's what Edward, or Malone, is being carried in. Bull was always careful to position the rabbit so that he was not looking down or up, but was instead forever looking behind him at the road they had just traveled. At night, they slept on the ground under the stars. Lucy, after her initial disappointment about Edward being unfit for consumption, took a liking to him and slept curled up beside him. Sometimes she even rested her muzzle on his china stomach, and then the noises she made in her sleep, whimpering and growling and chuffing, resonated inside Edward's body. To his surprise, he began to feel a deep tenderness for the dog. During the night, while Bull and Lucy slept, Edward, with his ever-open eyes, stared up at the constellations. He said their names, and then he said the names of the people who loved him. He started with Abilene and then went to Nellie and Lawrence, and from there to Bull and Lucy. And then they ended up again with Abilene, Nellie, Lawrence, Bull, Lucy, Abilene, and the pattern continued. Notice he didn't put Lolly in there. See, Edward told Pellegrina, I am not like the princess. I know about love. There were times, too, when Bull and Lucy gathered around a campfire with the other hobos. Bull was a good storyteller and an even better singer. Here's a nice picture of what they just said there. They're sitting around the campfire. Look at Malone on Bull's lap. He's still wearing Susanna's dress, but wonder if that will change. There's Lucy at the bottom. So Bull would be a good singer. Sing for us, Bull, the men shouted. Bull sat with Lucy leaning against his leg, and Edward balanced on his right knee, and he sang from somewhere deep inside himself. Just as Edward could feel Lucy's whimpers and growls through his body at night, he could also feel the deep, sad sound of Bull's songs move through him. Edward loved it when Bull sang. And he was grateful to Bull, too, for sensing that a dress was not the right kind of clothing for Edward. Malone, said Bull one night, it's not my desire to offend you or to comment negatively on your choice of garb, but I'm forced to tell you that you stick out like a sore thumb in that princess dress. And also again, with no wish to offend you, the dress has seen better days. Nellie's beautiful dress had not fared well at the dump or in its subsequent ramblings with Bull and Lucy. It was so torn and dirty and full of holes that it barely resembled a dress anymore. I have a solution, said Bull, and I hope that it meets with your approval. He took his own knit stocking cap and cut a big hole in the top of it and 2 small holes on the side of it, and then he took off Edward's dress. "Look away, Lucy," he said to the dog. "Let's not embarrass Malone by staring at his nakedness." Bull slid the hat over Edward's head and pulled it down and poked his arms through the smaller holes. "There you go," he said to Edward. "Now you just need some pants." The pants Bull made himself, cutting up several red handkerchiefs and sewing them together so that they formed a makeshift covering for Edward's long legs. "Now you have the proper outlaw look," said Bull, standing back to admire his work. "Now you look like a rabbit on the run." That's the end of chapter 13. So now Malone will look better like a boy. Let's take a look. Here's the picture of chapter 14. Sitting still on Bull's knee, and there is Malone looking just like a hobo too. Let's find out what's going to happen next. At first the others thought that Edward was a great good joke. "A rabbit," the hobo said, laughing. "Let's put him in the stew pot." Or when Bull sat with Edward carefully balanced on his knee, one of them would call out, "Got yourself a little dolly there, Bull?" Edward, of course, felt a surge of anger at being referred to as a dolly. But Bull never got angry. He simply sat with Edward on his knee and said nothing. Soon the men became accustomed to Edward, and word of his existence spread. So it was that when Bull and Lucy stepped up to a campfire in another town, another province, or another place entirely, the men knew Edward and were glad to see him. "Malone!" they shouted in unison, and Edward felt a warm rush of pleasure at being recognized, at being known. Whatever it was that had begun in Nellie's kitchen, Edward's new and strange ability to sit very still and concentrate the whole of his being on the stories of another became invaluable around the hobo campfire. "Look at Malone," said a man named Jack one evening. "He's listening to every dang word." "Certainly," said Bull. "Of course he is." Later that night, Jack came and sat next to Bull and asked if he could borrow the rabbit. Bull handed Edward over, and Jack sat with Edward upon his knee. He whispered into Edward's ear. "Helen," Jack said, "and Jack Jr., and Taffy, she's the baby. Those are my kids' names. They're all in North Carolina. You ever been to North Carolina? It's a pretty state. That's where they are, Helen, Jack Jr., Taffy. You remember their names, okay, Malone?" After this, wherever Bull and Lucy and Edward went, some hobo would take Edward aside and whisper the names of their children in Edward's ear. Betty, Ted, Nancy, William, Jimmy, Eileen, Skipper, Faith. Edward knew that it was like what it was like to say over and over again the names of those you had left behind. He knew what it was like to miss someone, and so he listened. And in his listening, his heart opened wide, and wider still. The rabbit stayed lost with Lucy and Bull for a long time. Almost 7 years passed, and in that time, Edward became an excellent tramp, or hobo we say, excellent tramp, and happy to be on the road, restless when he was still. The sound of the wheels on the train tracks became music that soothed him. He could have ridden the rails forever. But one night in a railroad yard in Memphis, as Bull and Lucy slept in an empty freight car and Edward kept watch, trouble arrived. Oh no! A man entered the freight car and shone a flashlight in Bull's face and then kicked him awake. "You bum," he said, "you dirty bum. I'm sick of you guys sleeping everywhere. This ain't no motel." And that's the old language of the day. A hobo would be, that's what they would call them. Bull sat up slowly. Lucy started to bark. "Shut up," said the man, and he delivered a swift kick to Lucy's side that made her yelp in surprise. All his life, Edward had known what he was. A rabbit made of china, a rabbit with bendable arms and legs and ears. He was bendable, though, only if he was in the hands of another. He could not move himself, and he had never regretted this more deeply than he did that night when he and Bull and Lucy were discovered in the empty rail car. Edward wanted to be able to defend Lucy, but he could do nothing. He could only lie there and wait. You see, they were kind of stealing a ride on the train and they weren't paying for it, so that's what the problem was. "Say something," said the man to Bull, and Bull put up his hands in the air. He said, "We are lost." "Lost, huh? You bet you're lost." And then the man said, "What's this?" And he shone the light on Edward. "That's Malone," said Bull. "What the heck?" said the man, and he poked at Edward with the toe of his boot. "Things are out of control. Things are out of hand. Not on my watch. No, sir. Not when I'm in charge." And the train suddenly lurched into motion. "No, sir," said the man again, and he looked down at Edward. No free ride for rabbits either. He turned and flung open the door of the rail car, and then he turned back, and with one swift kick, oh no, he sent Edward sailing out into the darkness. The rabbit flew through the late spring air. Far from behind him, he heard Lucy's howl. "Aroo! Aroo!" she cried. Edward landed with a most alarming thump, and then he tumbled and tumbled and tumbled down a long, dirty hill. When he finally stopped moving, he was on his back, staring up at the night sky. The world was silent. He could not hear Lucy. He could not hear the train. Edward looked up at the stars. He started to say the names of the constellations, but then he stopped. "Bull," his heart said. "Lucy." How many times Edward wondered, would he have to leave without getting the chance to say goodbye? A lone cricket started up a song. Edward listened. Something deep inside him ached. He wished that he could cry. And that's the end of chapter 14. So poor Edward, his journey is taking him from place to place to place. And I wonder what you're thinking about that. In class, we would talk about what just happened, and we would make some predictions and what you're thinking about. So you can write some of that down in your sequence chart if you like today. You can try to list all the names that he's been and the places he's been. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed those two, this chapter's today, these 3 chapters, and there was 3 in the other one. And I'll continue reading that too for next week, okay? So enjoy, have another good day, and I wish I could see you, but I know you can see me. So I'm happy you can see me. So we'll talk again soon, boys and girls. Bye.